The mountains weren't just tall, they were alive, breathing cold air through jagged valleys and whispering it against the rock like an ancient warning. Even with night vision goggles, the terrain looked alien. Sharp ridges carved shadows so deep they swallowed whole sections of the team from view. Every footstep was measured, calculated. Loose shale crumbled under boots and rattled into the void below. It had been quiet for hours. Too quiet. Chief Petty Officer Kane, point man and leader of the 8-man SEAL team, adjusted his NVGs and scanned the ridgeline ahead. His breathing was slow, deliberate, but his senses were on full alert. The mission was supposed to be straightforward insert. At dusk, hike into a mountain village, capture a high-value insurgent commander, and exfiltrate before first light. No firefights, no prolonged exposure. In theory, they'd be in and out before the locals even knew they were there. But Kane had been on too many simple missions to trust them. The trail wound along the cliff's edge, no more than 3 feet wide in places. To the left was a wall of jagged stone. To the right, a sheer drop hundreds of feet to the dry riverbed below. The air was thin, the kind of thin that made every lungful feel half-finished. Kane raised a fist and froze. The team behind him went. Still instantly, rifles up, scanning. There it was again, faint, metallic, almost lost in the sigh of the wind. A clink. Steel on rock. Hold, Kane whispered into his mic. His voice was steady, but his gut told him they weren't alone. They waited 30 seconds. Nothing moved. No sound but the soft hiss of wind through the rocks. He signaled forward. The trail curved left, hugging the cliff. The village, according to their GPS, was still a mile away. The glow from it was faint, just a smudge of light against the blackness of the valley floor. The team advanced in a crouch, rifles angled toward the high ground. Then crack. The shot came so close Kane felt the air snap beside his head. Stone chips exploded against his cheek. Contact. 2 o'clock, high ridge. Automatic fire erupted from above, stitching glowing lines of tracers across the darkness. The SEALs dove for whatever cover they could find, boulders, small rock shelves, anything to break the line of sight. Suppress, suppress, Kane barked. The roar of their rifles filled the valley. Short, disciplined bursts pushed back against the enemy fire, but the high ground belonged to the shooters above. Sparks sprayed with each impact on the rocks. The NVGs lit up with brilliant white flares every time a muzzle flashed. Kane risked a glance. 2 machine guns, dug into the ridge like ticks, had them pinned. From this angle, the shooters could see nearly the entire trail. Then came more gunfire, this time from the opposite ridge. They were in a crossfire. Break right, find defilade, Kane ordered. The team scrambled, darting between boulders, firing to keep the enemy's heads down. Bullets hissed overhead, smacking into stone with a deadly, metallic ping. A rock splintered beside Petty Officer Duran, showering him in shards. Kane, guns are trash, Petty Officer Briggs shouted, hunched over his rifle. Signals bouncing off the cliffs. Kane tried anyway. Viper 1 to Ops Center, in contact, coordinates. His transmission dissolved into static. He switched to the emergency distress frequency. Viper 1, multiple tangos. Pinned down, need immediate support. The automated distress loop began repeating. But distress calls were a dangerous gamble, if a friendly could hear it, so could the enemy. Rounds cracked into the rock inches from Kane's head. He ducked back behind cover, reloading. Ammo status. 2 mags, Duran said. Same, Briggs added. 3 here, Alvarez, the medic, replied. Not enough for a drone out. Fight. Kane scanned the slope. Shadows flitted along the ridge. They weren't just holding position. They were closing in. His stomach tightened. This wasn't a harassment fire. This was a planned kill zone. Eyes up, Kane said. There, bracketing us. The enemy had the perfect plan. Pin the SEALs, force them into a small section of cliff with no exit, then rain grenades or sustained fire until nothing moved. Kane had done the same thing to Taliban fighters years before. He knew exactly how effective it was. The thought of his men trapped and shredded on this cold rock hardened something inside him. He peered through the narrow gap between two boulders. There a rifle barrel protruding from a slit in the ridge. He could see the muzzle flash in sync with the rattling gunfire. The shooter was good, 2 tight bursts, controlled, forcing the SEALs deeper into cover without wasting ammunition. Alvarez slid into position beside Kane, his sleeve torn and stained. Grazed, Alvarez said before Kane could ask. Hurts, but I'm fine. Kane nodded. We can't stay here. We'll get boxed in. Another burst of machine gun fire shooed into the rocks above their heads. Shards rained down. The valley smelled of burnt powder and shattered stone. He pictured the map in his head. Their extraction point was still more than a mile out. Between here and there was a canyon choke point perfect for an ambush. If the enemy was coordinated enough to hit them from 2 ridges, the choke point was likely covered too. But they didn't have another option. On my mark, Kane said, voice low. We move to that boulder field at our 9. Duran, you and Briggs give me 3-second bursts. Everyone else bounds left. Copy. Mark, go. Gunfire erupted as Duran and Briggs laid down suppressive fire. The rest of the team sprinted, boots scraping stone, the air whistling with passing rounds. They dove into the boulder field, panting. A ricochet rang like a bell off the rock behind Kane's head. He gritted his teeth. Even moving in bounds, they were losing ground. He keyed the mic again. Viper 1, still in contact. Urgent support required. Coordinates repeated. The loop continued. Somewhere, maybe miles away, someone might hear it. But Kane knew they were fighting the clock. Each magazine was a countdown. Above them, the silhouettes kept shifting. The enemy was tightening the noose. Kane didn't let himself think about worst-case scenarios. He focused on the next 30 seconds, then the next. That was how you survived. But in the back of his mind, a thought refused to die. If help doesn't come soon, this mountain will be our grave. The emergency transmission cut through the static like a faint heartbeat. Viper 1, multiple tangos, pinned down, need immediate support, coordinates to follow. Then silence. A second later, the same desperate words repeated, ghostly through the hiss of background noise. In a windowless listening post hundreds of miles away, deep in an unmarked U.S. military installation, Senior Communications Specialist Daniel Price leaned closer to his headset. The fluorescent lights above hummed faintly, the room thick with the scent of stale coffee and ozone from overworked electronics. Price's job was to monitor long-range comms channels for unusual signals-coded messages, distress calls, anything that didn't belong. Most nights were mind-numbingly quiet. But tonight, something felt different. He adjusted the gain knob, tuning out the atmospheric static. The distress code repeated, stronger this time, carrying an unmistakable edge in the speaker's voice-controlled, calm, but layered with urgency. This wasn't a routine, we're in contact message. This was a lifeline being thrown in the dark. Price's fingers moved across his keyboard, logging the signal. He pulled up the coordinates, his brow furrowed. That's deep in hostile terrain. No forward team is supposed to be there tonight. He ran the numbers again, just to be sure. The location was in a narrow mountain corridor, with ridgelines on both sides and almost no viable extraction points except by air. The kind of terrain you avoided unless you were forced into it, the distress loop repeated. Viper 1, multiple tangos, pinned down. Price swore under his breath. This wasn't just a bad position. This was a kill box. Whoever was calling had minutes, maybe less, before the enemy closed in. He didn't bother going through the sluggish chain of command. Protocol said he should notify his supervisor, who'd escalate to the operations desk, who'd evaluate whether the distress call was legitimate before committing resources. But Price had been in the Navy long enough to know that by the time paperwork moved, men died. He opened a secure Kunz window and typed a short message. No code words, no explanation, just coordinates and a simple sentence. They're in trouble. Now, the recipient's call sign blinked on his screen. A private, encrypted channel. Price knew exactly who it was going to, someone who operated far outside the official playbook. Someone who didn't need permission to take action. Miles away, crouched under a rocky overhang on the side of a nameless ridge, the man known only as Ghost felt the vibration in his Kunz receiver. He tapped the small screen strapped to his wrist. The coordinates appeared instantly, scrolling across in green text. No mission briefing, no orders, just numbers and the faintest crackle of a voice buried in static. Ghost listened. Multiple tangos, pinned down, need immediate support. He didn't ask questions. He never did. The wind bit at his exposed skin as he shifted his position, bringing the small valley into his line of sight through a gap in the rocks. The ridgeline beyond glowed faintly under his night optics, flickers of heat signatures revealing themselves in brief bursts when gunfire lit the terrain. He counted them. 12, maybe 14 hostiles moving in coordinated sweeps. That was no ragtag band, it was a trained assault element. They had the high ground and were tightening their perimeter with deadly precision. Through the thermal scope, he picked out 8 smaller heat signatures pinned in the boulder field below. They moved with discipline, using cover efficiently. Ghost could tell by the spacing and movement. These weren't local fighters. These were American Special Operations Forces, and they were minutes from being overrun. He slid back into the shadows, unrolling his rifle mat and setting the long gun in place. The weapon was a custom-modified .338 Lapua Magnum with a suppressor that stretched nearly to the barrel's end. Every piece of it was designed for work like this, silent, precise, lethal, beyond the range of most rifles. Ghost didn't wear a uniform. His kit was a mix of civilian and military gear, stripped of anything that could identify him. No patches, no flags. Officially, he didn't exist. He chambered a round, the bolt sliding forward with a soft metallic click. The air smelled faintly of oil and cold stone. Down in the valley, the SEAL team was trading fire with the encroaching enemy. Ghost could hear the sharp rattle of suppressed M4 South mixed with the heavier, unsuppressed crack of the insurgents' PKMs. Every few seconds, the chatter of machine gun fire swept across the rocks like a cutting torch. Ghost calculated the wind drift instinctively, factoring in the thin mountain air. He shifted his scope toward the far right ridge, where an enemy sniper had set up behind a narrow slit of rock, his rifle barrel protruding. The sniper's position was almost invisible, almost. Ghost's breathing slowed. His world narrowed to a single point in the crosshairs. The enemy sniper's head moved slightly, adjusting his aim. Ghost's trigger finger tightened, smooth and deliberate, but he didn't fire. Not yet. He scanned the rest of the formation, building a mental map of their movement patterns. He'd need to drop targets in a sequence that maximized confusion, breaking the enemy's momentum. Hit the leadership first, then the heavy weapons, then anyone trying to flank. On his wrist display, the distress loop played again, faint but steady. He imagined the men below, each burst of static reminding them their message was out there somewhere, maybe reaching someone. It reached me. Ghost thought. In the listening post, Price saw the message received acknowledgement flash on his terminal. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. No one else in the room knew what he'd just done, and that was how it needed to stay. If Ghost succeeded, 8 Americans would live. If he failed, well, Price didn't let himself think about that. Ghost adjusted his bipod, dug his elbows into the mat, and settled in. His heartbeat slowed to a calm, steady rhythm. The enemy didn't know it yet, but the fight had just changed. Far below, Kane and his team were still firing in short, controlled bursts, conserving ammunition. They had no idea that somewhere beyond their sight, a rifle barrel was now aimed at their enemy from an impossible distance. The emergency call had left their hands, traveled across mountains, through static, into the ears of a man who had built his life on answering calls like this. And now, the shadow in the rocks was ready to speak with bullets. Ghost had learned a long time ago that rushing was the fastest way to get killed. Even with a distress call in his ear, even knowing there were Americans about to be surrounded, he moved slow, measured, deliberate. The mountains didn't care about urgency. They'd punish a careless step with a rock slide, and that noise would travel farther than a rifle shot in the still night air. From his vantage point beneath the overhang, Ghost studied the terrain again. The ridgeline ahead looked deceptively calm, but through the thermal scope, movement was constant. Enemy fighters shifting position, scanning, preparing to squeeze the life out of the SEAL team below. His mind broke the scene into priorities. Step 1. Identify command elements. Kill the brain and the body flails. Step 2. Take out the Overwatch snipers and machine guns. Step 3. Pick off flankers before they can close distance. Ghosts. Rifle was already dialed in from earlier observation work. He hadn't planned to use it tonight, but the long gun was always ready. In his world, unplanned just meant earlier than expected. He pressed his body flat against the ground, feeling the cold seep through his gear. With slow, calculated movements, he began crawling forward, using the darkness and jagged rock for cover. The map rolled up tight and strapped to his back, barely made a sound as he slid over gravel and dirt. Every 15 seconds, he stopped and listened. The mountains amplified small sounds, the crunch of a boot on loose stone, the faint metallic rattle of gear. He could hear the enemy talking in short bursts, their language carried in fragments by the wind. Down below, the firefight hadn't let up. The Americans were disciplined, answering each volley with controlled bursts, but Ghost could tell by the cadence that they were conserving ammunition. The enemy, meanwhile, was content to burn rounds, trying to keep the pressure high. He found a shallow depression in the ridge, dropped flat, and slowly extended the bipod of his rifle. From here, he had a partial view of the valley, not perfect. He needed higher ground. The climb was brutal. Loose shale made each upward push a gamble. One bad slide, and the noise would betray his approach. Ghost used his knees and elbows, shifting weight so that any movement was absorbed by the rocks before it could echo. It was the kind of movement most soldiers never learned, part mountain goat, part ghost. At the crest, he froze. 30 meters ahead, an enemy lookout stood silhouetted against the faint starlight. The man had his rifle slung, scanning lazily with binoculars. Bad discipline. Ghost moved closer, inch by inch, until the lookout was a hazy outline at the edge of his NVG range. He drew his suppressed sidearm, sighted in, and pressed the trigger. The muffled pop was almost swallowed by the wind. The lookout's knees buckled, and his body crumpled silently into the dirt. Ghost was already moving past before the man hit the ground. The new position was perfect. From here, the entire kill zone opened up like a map. He dropped to the mat, set the rifle, and began ranging targets. The first was obvious, a sniper hidden in a narrow rock slit on the far ridge. Ghost adjusted for distance 1,200 yards. Wind negligible, temperature cool enough for minimal barrel mirage. Through the scope, the enemy sniper's head and shoulders glowed faintly. The man was focused entirely on the SEAL leader below, the crosshairs of his own rifle steady on Kane's position. Ghost's breathing slowed. Inhale, exhale, let the heartbeat settle. He took the shot. The rifle's suppressed report was barely more than a hiss. A second later, the enemy sniper's head snapped back, and his body folded awkwardly out of sight. Ghost worked the bolt, already shifting to his next target. On the left ridge, a PKM machine gun team was raking the SEAL's cover with sustained bursts. Ghost sighted on the gunner first. Another squeeze, another body down. The assistant gunner froze, unsure where the fire was coming from too late. Ghost's next round punched him backward into the dirt. Panic spread fast. The fighters nearest the fallen machine gun ducked, shouting to each other in confusion. They scanned the SEAL's position, not realizing the shots were coming from. High above and behind them. Ghost took another, and another. Always the ones who looked like they were giving orders, moving with confidence, shouting commands. He avoided the ones firing blindly. Those men would burn ammo without achieving anything. Down below, Kane noticed the shift immediately. The fire from the right ridge had slackened, and the bursts from the left were sporadic now. Someone's helping us, Kane muttered over comms. Briggs fired a short burst at a shadow moving along the ridge. Who? Don't know, Kane said, but I'm not arguing. Ghost changed angles, sliding 2 meters to the right, making it harder for the enemy to pinpoint his position. Every move was slow, measured. He'd fire, shift, fire again. Within minutes, the enemy formation began to fracture. Some fighters were retreating toward the rear, dragging wounded. Others hesitated, unsure whether to advance without clear leadership. Ghost didn't give them time to decide. On his wrist display, he brought up his GPS. The extraction zone was still viable if the SEALs could get moving now. He sent the coordinates through the same narrowband frequency that had carried their distress call. No voice, just numbers. Kane's radio crackled. A string of coordinates appeared on his handheld screen. He checked them, and his eyes widened. That's a clear LZ, he said to Alvarez, and someone just marked it for us. Alvarez raised an eyebrow. Who? Don't know, Kane said again. But we're going to use it. Above them, Ghost scanned for any enemy still holding the high ground. He found an insurgent with an RPG, moving toward a position where he could get a shot at the SEAL's boulder field. Ghost's crosshairs tracked him. The shot broke, and the man went down hard, the RPG clattering harmlessly onto the rocks. In Ghost's mind, this wasn't about heroics. It was about math. Every man he dropped increased the odds of the SEAL team making it to that extraction point. Every second he bought was another second they weren't dying in that valley. He worked with machine precision, his face expressionless, breath steady. The world narrowed again, just the scope, the target, the squeeze, the impact. Below, the SEALs began shifting position, using the lull to push forward, bounding from rock to rock toward the marked LZ. Ghost stayed where he was, watching, covering, waiting for the next target to appear in his glass. He knew the fight wasn't over yet. The late afternoon sun bled into the mountains, painting the jagged Afghan ridges in molten gold and deep shadow. Heat still clung to the air, but the wind had shifted, cooler now, carrying the faint scent of dust, rock, and cordite from earlier. Gunfire. The valley lay quiet, too quiet, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Somewhere in that silence, Master Sniper Ethan Cross lay prone on a rocky outcrop, his body pressed into the earth, invisible to anyone who might be watching. His ghillie suit was layered with strips of burlap, local vegetation, and dust, blending him perfectly with the stony terrain. The only thing separating him from complete invisibility was the faint glint in his eye as he peered through the scope of his custom-built rifle. Below him, a SEAL team was pinned down in a dried riverbed, their voices occasionally breaking through the static of the radio. From his elevated position, Ethan could see flashes of movement, the enemy shifting positions, their ACAs glinting. In the dying light, they had numbers, and worse, they had the high ground on two sides. Cross adjusted the elevation turret on his scope, his gloved fingers moving with precision born from years of experience. Distance, 1,742 yards. Wind, 5 miles per hour from the northeast. Mirage, moderate. He calculated all of it in seconds, his brain working like a ballistic computer. He had been tracking this insurgent cell for 3 days, moving at night, sleeping in bursts of 20 minutes, surviving on ration bars and sips of lukewarm water. His mission had originally been reconnaissance, locate the enemy's supply route, and feed intel back to base. But when the distress call came in from the SEALs, Ethan had shifted without hesitation. Missions changed. Lives were the priority. Through the scope, he found the first target, a spotter crouched behind a boulder, glassing the SEALs with binoculars. Cross slowed his breathing, letting the world narrow until there was nothing but the crosshairs and the faint silhouette of a man who thought he was safe. Half breath in, hold, slow trigger squeeze. The suppressed rifle cracked, the sound more like a hard cough than an explosion. The spotter's head jerked, and he crumpled silently behind the rock. Ethan didn't watch him fall. His eyes were already searching for the next threat. On the SEAL's radio net, one voice cut in sharply. "1 Tango down, unknown shooter. Check your sectors." Ethan smiled faintly. They didn't know it was him yet. They wouldn't, not until he made sure every one of them walked out alive. The enemy reacted quickly. Without their spotter, they began firing more erratically, hoping to suppress the SEALs through sheer volume. Muzzle flashes popped from 3 positions. Ethan tracked the nearest, a man with an RPK light machine gun, trying to hose down the riverbed. The shooter made the mistake of shifting from cover. Ethan adjusted his hold for the wind, exhaled, and sent the round. The insurgent folded instantly, his weapon clattering against the rocks. In the riverbed, one SEL Ramirez used a momentary lull to drag a wounded teammate deeper behind cover. Over the net, another voice barked, "Whoever's up there, keep it coming." But Ethan didn't respond. Talking would only give away his position. Instead, he worked methodically, his rifle becoming an extension of his body. Every movement was deliberate. Then he saw it, the glint of a scope to the east, nearly half a mile away. Enemy sniper. Cross knew from experience that counter-snipers were the real threat. The enemy's marksman was already scanning, trying to locate whoever was taking his men. Ethan rolled slightly to the side, using the terrain to mask his barrel, then began inching his aim toward the hostile sniper's position. The man had set up behind a crumbling stone wall, partially concealed. The angle was bad. Ethan had to thread the shot through a gap barely wider than a soda can. The wind shifted again. He adjusted 2 clicks left, barely perceptible to anyone who didn't live inside a rifle scope. Squeeze. The shot passed through the gap cleanly, striking the enemy sniper squarely in the chest. He fell backward, his rifle tumbling from the yard. Wall. Another voice on the SEAL radio net. "Sniper down. Holy hell, who's doing this?" The tide began to turn. With fewer shooters pressing them, the SEALs could maneuver, moving from rock to rock, gaining a better position. Ethan kept firing in rhythm, one shot every 30 seconds, never staying on the same target line, always shifting after each. Trigger pull. Then, a complication. Over the ridgeline to the north, 3 more fighters appeared, moving fast and trying to flank the SEALs. They were within 500 yards of Ethan's position, dangerously close. He could feel the tension spike in his chest. If they spotted him, his cover would be blown, and the fight could swing back in the enemy's favor. Ethan reached for his suppressed pistol, just in case, but stayed on the rifle. He dropped the lead man with a center mass hit, then snapped. On to the second, who was already hitting the dirt and returning fire toward the ridge. Rounds cracked over Ethan's head, spraying chips of stone into his hair and gear. He rolled, shifted down the slope by 2 meters, and took the third man cleanly with a headshot before the second had time to adjust. Breathing heavy now, Ethan keyed his own secure radio, one the SEALs didn't have access to, and sent a quick burst transmission to command. Shadows to Overwatch. Package is in play. 6 hostiles down. SEAL element moving. Over. The reply came crisp. Overwatch copies. Continue coverage until exfil. The sun dipped lower, casting the valley into long shadows. Ethan kept firing until the enemy's resistance broke completely. One by one, the insurgents pulled back into the mountains, leaving their dead behind. Below, the SEALs began to move as a unit, carrying their wounded and keeping their weapons trained on. The ridgelines. They didn't know who had been covering them, but they knew someone had. Ethan stayed prone until they were nearly a mile away, ensuring no pursuit followed. Only then did he begin to crawl backward, slowly melting into the rocks and scrub, as if he'd never been there. Somewhere far below, a SEAL radio operator's voice crackled again. "Whoever you are, thank you." Ethan didn't answer. His work wasn't about thanks. It was about the men still breathing, because he'd been in the right place at the right time, and in the shadows no one ever saw coming. The night air over the valley had turned heavy, carrying the faint smell of burned powder and damp vegetation. From his hidden perch above the canyon floor, Cole adjusted his rifle ever so slightly, his cheek pressed firmly against the stock. Every muscle in his body was tuned to the moment, the type of tension only years of combat could hone. The SEAL team was still pinned down inside the old mud brick compound, their only cover crumbling with every hit from the enemy's heavy machine gun. Through the scope, Cole saw the enemy squad leaders waving their arms, signaling the next push. They'd been testing the perimeter for the past half hour, probing for weaknesses. This wasn't a random ambush anymore. It was a coordinated siege. And from the way they were moving, Cole could tell they had studied this ground before the SEALs ever landed. 6 actual, this is Ghost 2. Cole whispered into the radio, barely above breath. You've got another wave inbound from your east wall. They're staggered. Looks like they've got suppression lined up. A short burst of static. Then the SEAL commander's voice came through, tense but steady. Copy that, Ghost. 2. We'll hold. Can you thin them before they get too close? Cole's lips tightened. Already on it. He shifted his aim to the lead fighter carrying a PKM. Distance minus 427 yards. Wind shifting left to right. He exhaled, squeezed, and the man dropped before his finger even fully reset on the trigger. The 2 behind him hesitated, then darted for cover. That hesitation bought the SEALs precious seconds. But the problem wasn't the fighters in front. It was the truck Cole had spotted earlier, idling a mile back down the valley road. Through the faint moonlight, he could see silhouettes loading something long and cylindrical from the bed. Mortar tubes. They weren't going to just pepper the compound anymore. They were going to crater it. Cole slid back from his position and reached for his suppressed carbine. Time to move. he muttered to himself. Staying in one place now would mean giving the enemy a fixed point to triangulate, and the incoming mortar could reach him just as easily as the seals. He began to crawl along the spine of the ridge, his elbows and knees grinding silently through dirt and gravel. Every 30 yards, he paused to scan. Down below, muzzle flashes winked like fireflies, dozens of them now. He could almost hear. The seals returned fire, a steady, disciplined cadence that told him they were conserving ammo. They were holding for him, trusting that his shots from the shadows would tip the scales. When he reached a cluster of jagged rocks, he propped the rifle up again and checked his scope. The mortar team was still loading, their silhouettes crisp under the pale light. He calculated the range, just under 900 yards. A long shot even for him, but not impossible. The challenge wasn't hitting them. It was hitting them before they could fire their first round. Cole steadied his breathing, feeling the familiar calm wash over him. 1, 2, 3, he fired, and the man at the mortar tube crumpled. The others dove for cover, but he was already cycling the bolt, searching for the next target. Another shot. The loader dropped. The remaining fighters scattered into the shadows, dragging the mortar tube with them. For now, the barrage was delayed. Ghost 2-6 actual. Mortar threat? Neutralized for the moment, Cole replied. But they'll regroup. As he spoke, an explosion erupted just 20 meters from the SEAL's eastern wall. Not from mortar, but from a shoulder-fired RPG. The blast lit the night sky, sending a chunk of the wall into the air. The gap it left was enough for a rush. Cole's instinct screamed. He swung his scope to the breach and spotted movement. 5, maybe 6 fighters sprinting low. He fired 3 quick shots, 2 men falling instantly, the third stumbling before, disappearing behind the rubble. The SEALs inside finished the rest with controlled bursts. The radio crackled again, this time with more urgency. Ghost 2 were running low on ammo. Any chance you can get closer and push them back? Cole's jaw tightened. Moving closer meant giving up his high ground, but at this rate, the SEALs wouldn't last until extraction. Copy, he said after a beat. Cover me. He slung his sniper rifle across his back, unslung his carbine, and began descending the ridge. Each step was calculated, his boots finding silent purchase on loose soil. Below, the firefight was deafening. The pop of M4 South, the deeper thump of enemy. AKs, the occasional metallic ping of rounds hitting stone. Halfway down, he caught sight of 2 enemy fighters trying to flank the SEAL's rear. Cole dropped to a knee, took aim, and dispatched them before they even realized they'd been spotted. The shadows were his ally here, the moonlight breaking through in fractured beams, masking his movements. When he reached the valley floor, he hugged the contour of a dry riverbed, using it as a natural trench. The compound loomed ahead, the silhouettes of the SEALs barely visible against the broken wall. He slipped into a shallow depression, pulled out his radio again, and whispered, 6 actual, I'm 2 minutes out. Mark your friendlies. A single IR strobe blinked faintly atop the compound, invisible to the enemy without night vision. Cole adjusted his path, knowing exactly where the SEALs would be expecting him. But before he could reach the breach, another burst of gunfire erupted, closer this time, too close. He froze, scanning the darkness. A fighter emerged from the shadows not 20 feet away, his rifle raised. Cole moved first, his suppressed carbine coughing twice. The man dropped without a sound. He stepped over the body and pressed forward. The air was thicker here, dust from the earlier blast still hanging. He could hear the SEALs now, their short, sharp bursts holding the enemy at bay. The gap in the wall came into view, lit sporadically by muzzle flashes. Cole slipped through and immediately felt the shift, the tight, almost claustrophobic. Atmosphere of men under siege. The SEAL commander, a broad-shouldered officer with streaks of dust on his face, turned at the sight of him. "Glad you could join the party," he said grimly. Cole just nodded. "Let's push them back." They worked quickly, Cole taking a sniper position on the interior corner, the SEALs feeding him target calls. Every shot he took bought them more breathing room. Every second they held meant extraction was still possible. But outside, the enemy wasn't breaking. The trap was tightening. And Cole knew this was only the middle of the fight. The real storm was still coming. The valley was quiet, far too quiet for men who'd just been in a firefight. That stillness wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence where danger lurked, waiting for a wrong move. The SEALs were huddled in a shallow depression, scanning. The ridge lines, knowing the enemy was out there, somewhere, watching. Morgan lay prone atop a boulder 20 yards away, scope trained on the horizon. His rifle was steady, his breathing slow. Every few minutes, he shifted slightly, scanning for the telltale shimmer of glass or the unnatural outline of a helmet against rock. Through the earpiece, he could hear muffled voices, the SEALs checking ammo, whispering updates, a medic tending to Ramirez's wound. But beyond them, faint and almost lost in static, came another sound. A rustle on the wind, the soft grind of a boot sole against stone. He adjusted the magnification, zeroing in on the northern ridge. At first, it was just barren rock, scattered shrubs, and shadows stretching long in the setting sun. Then, in the corner of his lens, movement, almost imperceptible. A small flicker of light, like a sunbeam catching on metal. Contact. Ridge north, 800 yards, Morgan whispered into the com. Single shooter? Possibly a spotter nearby. Hold positions. Lieutenant Briggs' voice came back, low and steady. We've got no visual. You're our eyes. Morgan's finger rested lightly on the trigger, but he didn't fire. Patience was the difference between a shot and a kill. The figure was partially hidden behind an outcropping, only exposing his scope for split seconds. He was disciplined, probably trained in counter-sniper tactics. Minutes passed. Morgan waited. Every fiber of his being was tuned to that single shape on the ridge. The man moved again, a fractional shift in angle, and that was enough. Morgan's reticle settled over the target's head. He exhaled slowly and squeezed. The shot cracked through the still air, echoing down the valley. A figure dropped instantly, his rifle clattering on stone. But Morgan didn't celebrate. A single enemy sniper was rarely alone. The radio crackled. We've got movement on both flanks, Briggs warned. They're probing us. Morgan slid back behind cover, scanning again. Sure enough, small groups were shifting into position. 2 on the west ridge, 3 on the east, using rocks and shrubs for cover. They're tightening the noose, Morgan muttered. They'll pin you down from both sides. Briggs' voice was grim. What do you suggest? Morgan already had a plan forming. You stay low. Keep your wounded safe. I'm going to thin the herd before they get close enough to coordinate. Leaving his perch, he crawled along the ridgeline to a secondary firing position. From here, he had a clearer view of the eastern approach. He spotted the first hostile, AK slung, crouched low, darting between boulders. Morgan's rifle barked again, the shot sending the man tumbling. The others froze, then scrambled for cover, unsure of where the fire was coming from. That hesitation gave Morgan the seconds he needed to take down another. The west side fighters were still advancing, using the distraction to push forward. Morgan adjusted his angle, nearly lying sideways on the slope, and dropped one with a shot to the chest. Through the radio, he heard Briggs' voice sharpen. They're pulling back. East side's falling apart. Morgan knew it wouldn't last. These were not amateurs. They would regroup and try again under the cover of night. And night was coming fast. "Briggs, we've got maybe 30 minutes before darkness. Once it's dark, there'll be ghosts. You need to be ready to move." There was a pause. "We can't move Ramirez in his condition. Extraction ETA is still 2 hours out." Morgan swore under his breath. 2 hours in enemy territory, after dark, pinned in a valley. The odds were ugly. He pulled out his small notepad, sketching the ridgelines and possible approach vectors. His plan was risky, stupid even, but it was the only way to buy them time. He'd have to make the enemy think there were more shooters than just him. Over the next 20 minutes, Morgan shifted between 3 firing positions, firing single, precise shots from each, then going silent for several minutes. He made sure the angles and distances varied enough to mimic multiple snipers. The enemy hesitated, unsure of how many threats they were facing, but the deception could only last so long. As the last light drained from the sky, Morgan spotted movement again. A group of 4 creeping along the far ridge, their silhouettes faint against the twilight. They were staying low, keeping their weapons ready. Morgan fired, dropping one. The others froze, then broke into a sprint, zigzagging toward cover. He nailed the second mid-stride, the shot echoing across the valley. Then came the return fire, short, controlled bursts from the darkness. Rounds pinged against the rocks around him. He flattened himself, crawling backward, counting the seconds between bursts to gauge their position. Briggs' voice came through, tight with urgency. "We're getting flanked again. How long can you hold them?" Morgan's eyes flicked to the horizon, where the last trace of orange light was fading into black. He checked his watch. "Long enough," he said, though he wasn't sure if it was true. From the shadows, he spotted another glint, a scope catching moonlight. The second sniper. He'd been waiting all this time, letting the others soften. Morgan's position. Morgan shifted inch by inch until he had a clear line of sight. The man was patient, but not patient enough. His head tilted just slightly, exposing the side of his face. Morgan's shot was a whisper in the night. The man slumped, his rifle slipping away. Silence returned. For now. Morgan keyed the radio. "That's their second shooter down. But they're not done. Stay tight. They'll hit us again before extraction." And as the stars emerged over the jagged ridges, Morgan knew the real fight, the one fought in total darkness, was just about to begin. The dawn light was still faint, bleeding pale orange across the jagged Afghan ridge, when Mason slid into position on the western rise. The wind carried the metallic tang of gunfire, and every now and then, a single crack of an enemy marksman echoed across the valley. It was the type of sound that gnawed at the mind of a soldier, not the chaotic spray of assault rifles, but the deliberate, patient killing of another sniper. Through his spotting scope, Mason scanned the terrain below. The SEALs had secured a battered farmhouse overnight, turning it into a makeshift stronghold, but they were pinned. The enemy sniper was good, too good, hitting just close enough to keep them trapped, and too far for their own rifles to answer. Mason knew the man wasn't rushing, he was hunting. "Bravo 1, Shadow here," Mason whispered into his throat mic. "You've got a single shooter working in 3-second intervals. He's moving between 2 firing positions, East Ridge Line 800 yards out. I'll find him." "Copy, Shadow," the SEAL commander replied. "We've lost 2. To him already? Do your thing." Mason shifted the bipod on his M2010, resting it perfectly in the shallow groove he'd dug into the dirt. The rifle's weight was familiar, almost comforting. He adjusted for wind, mentally measuring the shifting breeze that rolled up the valley like ghostly fingers. A sharp exhale fogged the lens for half a heartbeat, a reminder to control even. His breath, Through the glass, a glint. It was there and gone in less than a second, like sunlight off a dragonfly's wing. That was all Mason needed. "Got you," he murmured. The enemy sniper was patient, but Mason was patient longer. He didn't fire on the first sighting. Instead, he traced the man's fallback route, watching how he slid behind a shale outcrop, then crawled into a cluster of jagged rocks. Mason noted every angle, every blind spot. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The sun climbed higher, burning mist off the valley floor. Mason's shoulders ached, but he didn't shift. Stillness was a weapon here. Finally, the shooter made his mistake. He leaned just an inch too far to set up his next shot. Mason's finger closed on the trigger with the same calm one might use to turn a page in a book. The suppressed crack was swallowed by the morning wind. Through the scope, Mason saw the figure jerk back violently, rifle tumbling from his hands. A single dark bloom spread across the man's chest before he slumped behind the rock. "Bravo 1, target down," Mason reported. Cheers erupted faintly over the coms, but Mason was already moving his scope again. "Not over," he added. "You've got movement. 4 hostiles flanking from the north tree line. Tight group, rifles, and 1 RPG. The SEALs responded instantly, shifting positions and opening precise bursts of fire. Mason picked off 2 of the flanking fighters before they could hit cover. The third fell to Ace E.A. All's carbine. The fourth ran, but not far. When the last echo of gunfire faded, Mason crawled backward off the ridge, disappearing into the shadows of the rocks, like he'd never been there. "Shadow, command here," came the voice in his earpiece. "Outstanding work. Extraction window. In 20. Can you hold perimeter until then?" "Always," Mason said simply. From his new position, he kept watch, scanning every inch of ground. The fight might have been over for now, but in Mason's mind, the hunt never truly ended. Somewhere out there, another rifle was waiting. And when it spoke, the shadow would answer again. The rotor blades were still miles away, but Mason could feel them in his bones. Years of combat had tuned his senses. He knew the thudding rhythm of rescue before it ever reached his ears. Somewhere beyond the valley ridge, a pair of UH-60 Black Hawks were threading through the mountains, coming for the battered SEAL team. The problem was, the enemy knew too. From his perch, Mason saw movement along the eastern ridge. 4 trucks, dust billowing in their wake, were barreling toward the farmhouse. Bed-mounted heavy machine guns glinted in the rising sun. The fighters weren't coming to scare them. They were coming to finish it. "Bravo 1, Shadow," Mason said into his mic. "Fast movers, East Ridge. You've got less than 5 minutes before they're in range." The SEAL commander's voice was tight. "Understood. Tell me you've got eyes." "I've got more than eyes," Mason replied. He settled behind his rifle, dialing his scope to the far limit. The first truck jolted over a rise, and Mason's crosshairs settled not on the driver, but the gunner standing in the back. A gentle squeeze, crack. The man folded, dropping against the mounted weapon. Before the driver could react, Mason shifted aim and punched around through the trucks. Radiator, steam erupted. The vehicle swerved, stalled, and rolled to a stop. The second truck came roaring past its crippled twin. Mason adjusted for speed, wind, and angle in a heartbeat. The driver never saw the shot that blew out his front tire, sending the vehicle flipping end over end in a cloud of dust and debris. The remaining 2 trucks split wide, flanking from opposite directions. Mason picked off a gunner from one, but the other kept coming. The heavy machine gun barked, shooing up the dirt wall in front of the farmhouse. "Shadow, they're on us," a SEAL shouted over the radio. "I see them," Mason answered, voice calm, movement surgical. He tracked the machine gun's rhythm, counting the bursts. The instant the gunner paused to reload, Mason put a round through the feed cover, shattering it and jamming the weapon. Then he took the shooter. The Black Hawks appeared over the ridge at that exact moment, their rotors kicking dust and air. Side gunners laying suppressive fire. The farmhouse shook under the roar of engines. Bravo 1, this is Hammer 2-1. You're clear for extraction, came the chopper pilot's voice. The SEALs broke from the farmhouse in disciplined formation, moving low and fast. Mason stayed put, his rifle still scanning, ready to drop anything that moved toward them. He took 2 more shots, dropping fighters trying to flank from the north. One SEAL stumbled, hit in the leg. Mason's scope snapped to the shooter, a figure hiding in a collapsed wall. One breath, one trigger pull, and the threat was gone. The injured SEAL was hauled to his feet and half carried toward the waiting Black Hawk. The last man on the ground wasn't a SEAL. It was Mason. He backed down from his position, moving through the rocks with the same ghost-like precision he had arrived with. The pilot's voice came over the comms. Shadow, you're 30 seconds out from dust-off. You miss it, you're walking home. Wouldn't be the first time, Mason said, smirking to himself as he slid down the slope. A burst of gunfire chased him, rounds sparking off the stones at his feet. He dove behind a ridge, rolled to his knees, and sent 2 rapid shots back. Silence followed. By the time he reached the open ground near the farmhouse, the second Black Hawk had dropped, low, kicking up a hurricane of dirt. A SEAL at the door waved him in. Mason jogged the last 20 feet, hopped onto the skid, and was pulled inside. The chopper lifted, the valley dropping away beneath them. Mason leaned back against the cabin wall, pulling off his headset. The SEAL commander sat across from him, nodding once in silent thanks. No words were needed. Below, the battlefield shrank to a distant scar in the earth, smoke curling skyward. Mason looked away from it, already thinking about the next place, the next call, the next shadow where he'd wait until someone needed him again. Because that's what ghosts did. They never stopped moving.